In this week's program, we're visiting with upland game supervisor Jesse Kolar, and we're going to talk grouse and partridge numbers and what hunters can expect when hitting the field this fall. I'm Mike Anderson with the North Dakota Game and Fish Department.
Our spring sharp-tail surveys went well. The conditions were great for the surveys, but our numbers were down 15% from where we were last year, pretty consistently across the state. And we noticed that decline, but we are not too concerned because our numbers in 2024 were much higher than where they'd been. So we're still sitting pretty well for sharp-tail. This time of year, we're actually driving around really slow every morning. We take advantage of really wet, dewy mornings to drive established and random routes, covering back roads and trying to observe as many adult birds as we can with their broods so that we can get an estimate of the juveniles to adults. That survey period runs from July 20th through August 31st. Right now it's looking really poor for sharp-tail as far as density. The reproductive metrics have been about the same as they have the last few years, but our densities overall have been down about 50% of where they were last year. We're just not seeing very many sharp-tail on the landscape. I'm hoping that some of it's due to increased cover from all our precipitation this year, but even with years in the past where we've had heavy precipitation and abundant cover, we've still seen more sharp-tail than this. The one good part about that, I guess, is that where we have seen birds, they have similar brood sizes and similar juvenile to adult ratios is what we've had in the past few years. So the reproduction seems okay where there are birds, but just not seeing as many as we had expected. The spring counts are the best metric for the density, just because we know during these roadside routes that we're missing a lot of grouse. We rely on wet, dewy mornings to push them to the roads, but obviously this is grouse habitat. You know, they don't need to go to a road to get out of dew in a short grass prairie. They can find a hillside and someplace that's perfectly dry enough. So it's not the best survey for density. It's much better for reproductive estimates. And like I said, where we are seeing grouse, their broods are average this year. Two chicks per adult is a pretty good average for a year that's going to be a banner year. We're seeing about 1.4 chicks per adult so far in our surveys. The western third of the state's always been better for sharp-tail. Obviously, for years we've talked about the 100th meridian being the line where you couldn't do agriculture further west of that, and so it's always been a lot more grazing and ranch lands west of Bismarck. That's promoted longer preservation of some of the short grass prairies that the sharp-tail are living on. Obviously, more recent advances in agriculture have shifted that line quite a bit further west, but it's still where we have predominantly areas that are ranch lands or grazing lands. Further east, once you get east of about Jamestown, we start running out of some of those grasslands and getting to be a lot more predominated by agriculture. Gray partridge we don't do a spring survey for. Gray partridge are hard to find in the spring because they're pretty sparse on the landscape. They do pair up and they sometimes do displays, but it's not as obvious as a pheasant crowing or as a sharp-tail lekking. So we don't do a survey for them in the spring. Our main survey numbers for partridge come this time of year as we're doing our brood routes or our late summer roadside counts. Again, driving roads early in the morning, looking for upland birds along the roadsides. Partridge numbers look like they're going to be down about 15% statewide. Unfortunately, it's primarily in the northwest part of the state where the numbers were down almost 70% from where they had been last year. Again, better cover, hopefully some of that's detectability, but also, you know, they've been at 30-year highs in the northwest and throughout the state. So seeing declines like that is expected. We have had large amounts of precipitation. Cold, wet weather is just really difficult for raising chicks, so we know that was hard on them. We also get asked about the impact of the severe storms we've seen. So we've seen quite a few storms with hail, quite a few tornadoes early in the summer, and all those severe storms can ultimately affect reproduction and adult survival of upland birds. This year, the hailstorms, we always say hailstorms are typically a localized event, and we're not too concerned with how they affect birds because it's pretty small on the scale of the entire state. However, we've had some really big hail swaths this year. There was one south of South Hart that went south of Dickinson, That hailstorm had a swath of about 45 miles by 3 miles wide. So when you think about that, that's over 100 square miles of an area that was impacted and probably isn't going to have good reproduction or maybe even adult numbers this fall. Same with the tornadoes that went through. There were a couple massive tornadoes. The one in the eastern part of the state that was most devastating probably wasn't in the heart of upland hunting country, but there were some in the western part of the state that will have impacts on adult and juvenile abundances this fall. Ruffed grouse are a unique grouse species for North Dakota, particularly because we don't have a lot of woods and they're a woodland grouse species. But we do have 2 pockets of predominantly aspen forest where you can find ruffed grouse in North Dakota, the Pembina Hills and then the Turtle Mountains. We do a survey each spring called a drumming survey where we drive around and do routes, stopping at fixed stops, listening for 5 minutes to see how many ruffed grouse we're hearing. And this year our numbers were down slightly in the Turtle Mountains and roughly the same as where they were last year for the Pembina Hills. And so I suspect the minor declines that we saw this spring aren't going to be enough to be noticed in the field. It should be similar to last year. So the numbers for partridge and sharptail are going to be below what they were in previous years. Sharptail are still right below their 20-year average, so we're sitting at a good spot with sharptail still, even though they are down. We'll have to see the low reproduction is going to affect the hunting, our hunting forecast. In partridge, I believe we're still going to be well above what hunters were used to for the past 20 years. We've been riding a high for the past 5 years, so it's not surprising they're down from that high, but still plenty of partridge out in the landscape.